Welcome back, everyone. This is Module 3 of our CDMP certification cohort, and in my experience, this is one of the most misunderstood chapters in the entire DAMA DMBoK. I have worked across global organizations, including investment banks, energy companies, and highly regulated enterprises. Whether it was JP Morgan Chase managing trillions of dollars in financial assets, ADNOC managing complex energy operations, Barclays navigating regulatory scrutiny, or NatWest transforming enterprise data capabilities, one lesson remained consistent. Organizations do not fail because they lack data. They fail because nobody truly owns it. They fail because definitions differ. They fail because quality deteriorates. They fail because accountability is unclear. And ultimately, they fail because governance is absent. That is why data governance exists, not as a technology initiative, not as a database project, not as a reporting exercise, but as the system of authority and control that determines how an organization manages one of its most valuable assets, data. Today, we are beginning DAMA DMBoK Chapter 3, Data Governance, and I want you to think of this chapter as the constitution of enterprise data management. Every other DMBoK discipline, data quality, metadata, master data, data architecture, data warehousing, data security, depends on governance. Without governance, every other discipline becomes fragmented. Without governance, quality programs collapse. Without governance, metadata becomes outdated. Without governance, MDM becomes a political battle. Without governance, regulatory compliance becomes impossible. Data governance is the foundation that allows every other data management capability to operate successfully. Now look carefully at the subtitle of this slide: Mastering Enterprise Authority, Control, and Stewardship. Those three words are extremely important: authority, control, stewardship. These three concepts appear repeatedly throughout the CDMP exam. Let's unpack them. Authority means who has the right to make decisions about data. Control means how those decisions are enforced. Stewardship means who is responsible for ensuring those decisions are carried out consistently. Notice something important. None of these involve building databases. None involve ETL. None involve Spark. None involve Snowflake. None involve cloud architecture. Those are execution activities. Governance exists above execution. Governance decides. Management executes. This distinction is perhaps the single most important concept in the entire chapter, and I cannot emphasize this enough because the CDMP exam deliberately tries to confuse candidates here. Let's talk about the first learning objective: define. The slide says, master the exact DAMA definition separating data governance from data management. This sounds simple. It isn't. Most candidates lose marks because they blur these two concepts. Let's create a simple analogy. Imagine a country. The government creates laws. Police enforce laws. Citizens follow laws. Who is doing governance? The government. Who is performing operations? Everyone else. Similarly, in an enterprise, data governance creates policies. Data management executes those policies. Governance says customer records must have a single authoritative source. Management builds MDM systems. Governance says critical data elements must be monitored. Management creates dashboards. Governance says definitions must be standardized. Management updates systems and reports. Governance decides. Management executes. Memorize that distinction. The exam will test it repeatedly. The second learning objective discusses operating models: centralized, replicated, federated. These are not merely organizational charts. These determine how authority is distributed across the enterprise. Consider JP Morgan. Thousands of applications, multiple countries, hundreds of business functions. A fully centralized governance model would struggle. A fully decentralized model would create chaos. Therefore, large enterprises often choose a federated model. We'll explore this deeply in later slides. But for now, understand, governance requires structure, and structure requires an operating model. The third objective focuses on execution capabilities, stewardship, policies, issue management. These represent the practical mechanisms through which governance becomes real. Many organizations create governance councils. Many create policies. Many publish standards, but very few create accountability. And accountability is where stewardship enters. Stewards are the people who ensure governance decisions become operational reality. Without stewards, governance becomes a PowerPoint presentation. With stewards, governance becomes an enterprise capability. The fourth learning objective introduces organizational change management. This is where many governance programs fail. The technology works, the data model works, the policies exist, yet the program fails. Why? Because people continue behaving the same way. People continue creating local spreadsheets. Business units continue using different definitions. Teams continue ignoring standards. Data governance is fundamentally a people transformation initiative, not a technology transformation initiative. Think about that carefully. If culture does not change, governance does not exist. The fifth objective is certification readiness. The slide mentions scenario-based questions. This is exactly how CDMP tests data governance. You will rarely receive simple definition questions. Instead, you will see situations. For example, a global bank wants enterprise standards but local flexibility. Which governance model should be chosen? Or an organization wants to define policies but not execute them. Which function owns that responsibility? Or a data quality issue affects multiple business units. Who should resolve the conflict? These scenario-based questions require understanding, not memorization. Our objective throughout this module is to prepare you to think like a chief data officer, not merely a CDMP candidate. Now, let's focus on the exam tip shown on the slide. It says, memorize this definition exactly. Data governance is the exercise of authority and control, planning, monitoring, and enforcement over the management of data assets. This definition comes directly from DAMA. Let's break it apart. Exercise of authority. Who can make decisions? Exercise of control. How are decisions enforced? Planning. What policies and standards are needed? Monitoring. How do we measure compliance? Enforcement. How do we ensure adherence? And finally, over the management of data assets. Notice it does not say over databases. It does not say over applications. It does not say over infrastructure. It says data assets, because governance focuses on the asset itself. This distinction is critical for the exam. As someone who has led enterprise-scale data initiatives across banking, capital markets, risk, regulatory reporting, energy trading, and enterprise transformation programs for over 2 decades, I can tell you that every successful data transformation begins with governance. Not technology, not AI, not cloud migration, not analytics. Governance. Because governance answers the most important question in enterprise data management. Who gets to decide? Once that question is answered, everything else becomes easier. Architecture becomes clearer. Quality improves. Metadata becomes trusted. Master data succeeds. Analytics become reliable. And business value accelerates. So, as we begin Chapter 3, I want you to remember one sentence. Data management is about doing the work. Data governance is about deciding how the work should be done. If you remember that distinction, you have already mastered the most important concept of this chapter. In the next slide, we will explore why organizations invest millions of dollars in data governance and examine the business drivers, regulatory pressures, and strategic motivations that make governance a board-level priority. Let's move to slide 2, the why, business drivers, and distinctions. Welcome back, everyone. Now that we understand what data governance is, the next logical question is, Why do organizations invest millions of dollars in governance programs? Why do global banks hire chief data officers? Why do regulators demand governance frameworks? Why do boards discuss data as a strategic asset? And why does DAMA place data governance at the center of the entire DMBoK wheel? The answer is simple: because unmanaged data creates risk, and governed data creates value. This slide is one of the most important conceptual slides in the entire chapter, because it explains both the business motivation behind governance and the critical distinction between governance and management. Understanding these concepts will help you answer a significant percentage of CDMP examination questions. Let's start with the business drivers. On the left side of the slide, we see 3 primary business drivers. These are the exact reasons organizations fund governance initiatives. Let's examine each one. Driver number 1, reducing risk. In most enterprises, risk is the single biggest catalyst for governance investment. Think about a global bank. Customer data exists in hundreds of applications. Some systems say a customer is active. Others say inactive. One application has an outdated address. Another contains incomplete KYC information. Which version is correct? Nobody knows. Now imagine regulators arrive. Suddenly data quality becomes a regulatory issue. Suddenly governance becomes a survival issue. At JP Morgan, Barclays, NatWest, and virtually every major financial institution, data governance became dramatically more important after the global financial crisis. Regulators realized institutions could not adequately measure risk because they could not trust their data. This led to regulations such as BCBS 239, GDPR, CCPA, Solvency II, Basel III, IFRS reporting frameworks. Every one of these regulations relies heavily on trusted data. Consider GDPR. If a customer requests deletion of personal information, can you identify every location where that data exists? If not, you have a governance problem. Consider a cybersecurity breach. Can you identify which systems contain sensitive data? Can you identify who owns that data? Can you identify who approved access? If not, you have a governance problem. Governance exists because organizations cannot manage risk without understanding and controlling data. Driver number 2, improving processes. Many executives initially think governance is a compliance initiative. It isn't. Governance is equally an efficiency initiative. Let's look at a common example. Imagine 5 departments each define customer differently. Marketing defines a customer as someone who purchased. Finance defines a customer as someone invoiced. Operations defines a customer as someone onboarded. Risk defines a customer as someone with exposure. Analytics defines a customer as someone appearing in a data warehouse. Now imagine a board meeting. 5 reports, 5 customer counts, 5 different answers. This happens more often than people realize. Governance solves this by establishing common definitions and accountability. Once definitions are standardized, reports become consistent. Analytics become trusted. Projects accelerate. Reconciliation effort decreases. Operational costs decline. This is why organizations pursuing master data management, data quality, metadata management, data warehousing, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all eventually discover they need governance. Governance is the prerequisite capability. Without governance, every downstream initiative becomes more expensive and less successful. Driver number 3, strategic enablement. This is where governance moves from defensive value to offensive value. Many executives ask, how does governance help us make money? The answer lies in strategic enablement. Think about modern organizations, AI initiatives, customer analytics, digital transformation, cloud migration, advanced reporting, personalization, real-time decision-making. All of these depend upon trusted enterprise data. Without trusted data, AI models hallucinate, reports conflict, predictions become inaccurate, Customer experiences deteriorate. Decisions become unreliable. This is why DAMA identifies governance as a prerequisite for master data management, advanced analytics, enterprise data strategy, data monetization, digital transformation. Governance creates the trust layer that enables business innovation. Hashtag, the most important concept on this slide. Now let's move to the diagram on the right. This is one of the most tested concepts in CDMP. The distinction between data governance and data management. Candidates confuse these constantly. The exam writers know this, therefore they test it repeatedly. Let's examine the diagram carefully. The first block says data governance. Below it, ensuring data is managed. Notice the wording, not managing data, ensuring data is managed. That single word changes everything. Governance does not perform the work. Governance ensures the work gets performed. Governance creates authority. Governance creates accountability. Governance creates standards. Governance creates policies. Governance creates oversight. In the center, we see data, information, and content life cycles. This represents the actual data ecosystem: data creation, data storage, data usage, data sharing, data retention, data archival, data disposal. Finally, we see data management, managing data to achieve goals. Notice the difference. Management executes. Governance asks, what should happen? Management asks, how do we make it happen? Shall, a real-world example. Suppose an organization determines that customer birth dates are critical data elements. Governance decides, birth date must be mandatory. Birth date must follow a standard format. Birth date quality must exceed 98%. Birth date ownership belongs to retail banking. Birth date changes require approval. Those are governance decisions. Now management takes over. Database teams update schemas. ETL teams modify pipelines. Data quality teams create validation rules. Application teams implement controls. Metadata teams update catalog entries. Those are management activities. One decides, the other executes. One governs, the other manages. Memorize this distinction. You will see it throughout the CDMP examination. Shall, the separation of duties. Look at the lower left table. DAMA deliberately separates data governance, data management. Many candidates combine them. That is incorrect. Hashtag IT governance focuses on technology assets, servers, networks, applications, infrastructure, cloud platforms, security architecture, technology investments. Frameworks such as COBIT operate here. Think the pipes. Data governance focuses on the data asset itself, definitions, ownership, policies, standards, accountability, decision rights, stewardship. Think the rules. Data management focuses on execution, integration, storage, quality monitoring, architecture, ETL, metadata implementation, reporting. Think the work. A simple way to remember: IT governance governs technology. Data governance governs data. Data management manages data. Hashtag CDMP examination trap. Now let's discuss the exam tip at the bottom. The slide warns that the exam often attempts to trick candidates by describing technical activities. You might see a scenario like this. A team is designing a new ETL architecture to improve customer reporting. Many candidates choose data governance. That answer would be wrong. ETL design is data management. Another example. A team establishes a rule requiring all customer records to have unique identifiers. Now we are discussing standards and policies. That is data governance. Another example. A committee decides who owns customer data across the enterprise. Governance. A developer modifies an ETL job to enforce the rule. Management. A server migration project upgrades database infrastructure. IT governance. Notice how the exam constantly tests these boundaries. The secret to passing Chapter 3 is recognizing which activity belongs to which discipline. Hashtag executive perspective. At the executive level, data governance answers 4 fundamental questions. Who owns the data? Who can make decisions? Who is accountable? How will compliance be measured? Everything else flows from these answers. This is why governance is positioned above every other DAMA knowledge area. It provides authority, it provides control, it provides accountability. Without governance, every department creates its own truth. With governance, the enterprise creates one truth. So, as we conclude this slide, remember the key message. Organizations invest in data governance to reduce risk, improve operational efficiency, and enable strategic value creation. And remember the most important distinction in the chapter. Data governance ensures data is managed. Data management manages the data. That single distinction can easily earn you multiple marks on the CDMP examination. In the next slide, we move deeper into the philosophy of governance itself and explore what DAMA calls the data-centric enterprise, the mindset shift required to treat data as a true corporate asset rather than merely a byproduct of business processes. Let's move to slide 3, Principles of a Data-Centric Organization. Welcome back, everyone. Now that we've discussed why organizations invest in data governance, we need to explore something even more fundamental. Before governance structures, before committees, before policies, before stewardship, before chief data officers, there must be a shift in mindset. And that mindset is called becoming a data-centric organization. This slide is not about frameworks. It is not about governance operating models. It is not about technology. It is about culture. And in my experience leading data programs across global banks, commodity trading organizations, and large-scale transformation programs, culture is where most governance initiatives either succeed or fail. Not because the governance model was wrong, not because the technology was weak, but because the organization never truly accepted one simple idea. Data is an enterprise asset. The moment an organization genuinely believes that statement, everything changes. What does data-centric really mean? Let's start with a simple question. Imagine I walk into the CFO's office and ask, "What are your most valuable assets?" The CFO might answer, "Cash, property, intellectual property, investments, equipment, brand value, customer relationships." Now imagine asking, "What is the value of your enterprise data?" Most organizations cannot answer. Yet they make billions of dollars worth of decisions using that data. Think about that. Organizations know the value of buildings. Organizations know the value of machinery. Organizations know the value of inventory. But many cannot explain the value of the information driving their decisions. That is the difference between a traditional organization and a data-centric organization. A traditional organization views data as a byproduct. A data-centric organization views data as an asset. The data-centric enterprise mindset. Let's look at the left side of the slide. DAMA highlights 3 foundational beliefs. These beliefs form the DNA of a mature data-driven organization. Hashtag Principle 1. Data is a corporate asset. This sounds obvious, yet very few organizations behave this way. Think about physical assets. A company owns a building. Everyone understands. There is ownership, there is maintenance, there are controls, there are audits, there is accountability. Now compare that with data. Customer data, product data, supplier data, trade data, risk data. Who owns it? Who maintains it? Who approves changes? Who ensures quality? Who measures value? Many organizations cannot answer. Data-centric organizations can answer every one of those questions because they treat data exactly like any other corporate asset. This concept appears repeatedly throughout DAMA DMBoK. Data may be intangible. You cannot touch it. You cannot physically store it in a warehouse, yet it generates enormous business value. Think about companies such as Google, Amazon, Netflix. Much of their competitive advantage comes not from physical assets, but from data assets. The same principle applies to banks, energy companies, healthcare providers, insurers, and retailers. Data creates value. Therefore, data must be governed. Principle 2. Data quality is a business responsibility. This is one of DAMA's strongest messages, and it surprises many professionals. Most organizations believe data quality is an IT problem. DAMA says, no, data quality is a business problem. Let's examine why. Suppose a customer record contains an incorrect risk rating. Who created the rating? The business. Who uses the rating? The business. Who suffers losses because of the rating? The business. The technology team may store the data, but they do not determine its meaning. At JP Morgan, for example, a trade may move through dozens of systems. Technology teams maintain the infrastructure, but business users define counterparty classifications, risk categories, trading attributes, valuation rules. Business meaning always belongs to the business. Therefore, data quality ultimately belongs to the business. This is why DAMA repeatedly emphasizes data governance is a business program, not an IT program. When CDMP asks, who owns data quality, the safest answer is usually the business owner or steward, not the database administrator, not the ETL developer, not the infrastructure team. Hashtag Principle 3. Data strategy must align with business strategy. This sounds simple, yet it is one of the biggest reasons governance programs fail. Many organizations create a data strategy that sounds impressive. Build a data lake, deploy AI, implement metadata management, launch a data catalog, create a master data hub. But nobody asks, why? What business outcome are we trying to achieve? A successful governance program always begins with business goals. For example, reduce regulatory risk, improve customer experience, increase trading profitability, accelerate digital transformation, enable AI adoption, reduce operational costs, improve reporting accuracy. Once the business objective is clear, governance priorities become obvious. The most mature organizations do not create data strategies. They create business strategies enabled by data. That is a massive difference. Data-centric enterprise temple. Now let's move to the right side of the slide, one of DAMA's most powerful visual models, the data-centric enterprise temple. Think of this as the architecture of successful governance. At the top is the data-centric enterprise. Everything below supports it. Pillar 1. Business-driven governance exists to support business outcomes, not technology outcomes, not tool implementation, not architecture diagrams. Business outcomes. Every governance decision must answer, how does this help the business? Pillar 2. Shared responsibility. This is critical. Data governance is not the responsibility of one department, not IT, not data office, not risk, not compliance. Everyone shares responsibility. Business owners, stewards, executives, architects, analysts, developers, operations teams. Governance succeeds only when responsibility is shared. Pillar 3. Multi-layered governance operates at multiple levels. Enterprise, domain, business unit, application, data element, regulatory, operational, strategic. Different decisions occur at different layers. This is why governance structures become necessary. Pillar 4. Framework-based. Successful governance is systematic, not ad hoc, not personality-driven, not dependent on one executive. Frameworks create consistency, repeatability, accountability, scalability. This is why DAMA places so much emphasis on policies, standards, stewardship, councils, and governance structures. Pillar 5. Principle-based. Mature organizations govern using principles, not endless rules. Rules eventually become obsolete. Principles endure. For example, data is an enterprise asset. Data quality is everyone's responsibility. Definitions must be standardized. Critical data requires stewardship. These principles guide thousands of operational decisions. Pillar 6. Strategy aligned. Everything must connect back to enterprise strategy. Governance cannot operate independently. The moment governance becomes disconnected from business goals, executives stop funding it. The foundation of the entire temple. Now look at the base. This is perhaps the most important element. Leadership and C-level sponsorship. I have seen governance programs fail despite excellent technology, excellent policies, excellent people, excellent frameworks. No executive sponsorship. Governance creates organizational change. Organizational change requires authority. Authority requires leadership. Without executive sponsorship, policies are ignored. Standards become optional. Stewardship loses influence. Funding disappears. Momentum dies. This is why DAMA repeatedly emphasizes the role of chief data officers, executive sponsors, data governance councils, steering committees. Governance begins at the top, not at the bottom. #CDMP examination trap. Now let's discuss the exam tip. The slide warns, data governance is a business program, not an IT project. This appears constantly in CDMP exams. You may see a question describing data quality problems, metadata inconsistencies, master data issues, conflicting definitions, regulatory failures. One answer may suggest assign ownership to IT. Another may suggest create enterprise stewardship and business accountability. The second answer is almost always closer to DAMA thinking, because governance belongs to the business. Technology supports governance. Technology does not own governance. Real-world executive perspective. The organizations that outperform competitors today have one thing in common. They make better decisions. Better decisions require better information. Better information requires better data. Better data requires governance. And governance requires a data-centric culture. That is the chain. When executives understand this relationship, governance stops being viewed as compliance overhead. It becomes a strategic capability, a competitive advantage, an enterprise asset management discipline. As we conclude this slide, remember the core message. A data-centric organization treats data as a corporate asset, makes the business accountable for quality, aligns data strategy with business strategy, and sustains governance through executive sponsorship. Everything else in data governance builds on this foundation. In the next slide, we move directly into the DAMA framework itself and examine the official data governance context diagram, inputs, activities, participants, tools, and deliverables. This is one of the most important CDMP exam diagrams in the entire DMBoK. Let's move to slide 4, DAMA context diagram, data governance. Welcome back, everyone. So far, we've answered 2 fundamental questions. First, what is data governance? Second, why does it matter? And in the previous slide, we discussed what it means to become a data-centric enterprise. Now we move into something extremely important for both real-world governance programs and the CDMP examination. The DAMA context diagram for data governance. This is one of the diagrams that many candidates look at briefly and then forget. That is a mistake, because this diagram effectively summarizes the entire data governance discipline into a single page. If you understand this slide, you understand how governance operates inside an enterprise. Think of this diagram as the operating blueprint for a governance program. It tells us what goes into governance, what governance does, who participates, which tools are used, what comes out of governance. In other words, inputs, activities, people, technology, outputs. Exactly how every mature business process should be understood. The big picture. Let's zoom out for a moment. Imagine you're hired as the chief data officer of a global bank. The CEO walks into your office and says, We need data governance. The natural question becomes, where do I begin? What information do I need? What activities should I perform? Who should participate? What deliverables should be produced? This DAMA context diagram answers those questions. Section 1, Inputs. Let's begin with the left side of the diagram, the inputs. Every governance program starts with inputs. Without inputs, governance becomes guesswork. The slide identifies three major inputs: business and IT strategy, regulatory requirements, data maturity assessment. Let's examine each one. Input 1, business and IT strategy. Governance must support business objectives, not operate independently. This is one of the most common reasons governance programs fail. Organizations create governance structures without understanding business priorities. For example, a bank may prioritize regulatory reporting. A retailer may prioritize customer analytics. An oil trading company may prioritize trade risk transparency. A healthcare provider may prioritize patient privacy. Each organization requires different governance priorities. At Barclays or NatWest, governance priorities often revolve around risk reporting, customer data, financial reporting, regulatory compliance. At ADNOC, governance priorities might focus on production data, asset management data, trading data, supply chain information, operational excellence. The governance strategy must always align with business strategy. Otherwise, governance becomes an academic exercise. Now we move to regulations. This is one of the largest drivers of governance investment worldwide. Many organizations begin governance because regulators force them to. Consider financial services. Regulations such as BCBS 239, Basel frameworks, GDPR, CCPA, MiFID, IFRS reporting all require trusted data. Regulators ask difficult questions. Can you prove data lineage? Can you demonstrate ownership? Can you show accountability? Can you identify data definitions? Can you explain how reports are generated? Can you demonstrate quality controls? Without governance, these questions become impossible to answer. Governance transforms compliance from reactive firefighting into proactive control. That is why DAMA identifies regulation as a foundational input. Input 3, data maturity assessment. This is where many governance programs should start. Before designing governance, we must understand current capabilities. Think about visiting a doctor. The doctor does not prescribe treatment immediately. First comes diagnosis. Similarly, governance requires assessment. Questions include, do we have defined ownership? Do we have stewards? Do we have policies? Do we have standards? Do we have quality controls? Do we have metadata? Do we have executive sponsorship? Do we have issue management? Do we measure governance success? The answers determine maturity, and maturity determines the roadmap. A Level 1 organization requires foundational governance. A Level 4 organization requires optimization. The same solution does not fit every organization. Hashtag core activities, the governance life cycle. Now we arrive at the center of the diagram. This is where governance creates value. Notice the title, Core Activities. These are the activities that transform governance from concept into capability. The slide shows 4 primary activities. Hashtag Activity 1, define data governance for the organization. This is the charter phase. The organization decides what governance means. What problems governance will solve. What scope governance will cover. What authority governance possesses. This stage often includes governance charter, vision statement, mission statement, business case, scope definition, funding requests, executive sponsorship. Without this foundation, governance lacks legitimacy. Now, Activity 2, define data governance strategy. Once governance exists conceptually, strategy must be established. This answers questions such as, What operating model should be used? Who owns data? How will stewardship operate? Which domains are critical? Which policies are required? What are the success measures? What is the implementation roadmap? Think of the charter as defining why. Think of strategy as defining how. Now, Activity 3. Implement data governance. Now, execution begins. This is where many organizations believe governance starts. In reality, implementation is the third phase. Implementation includes creating committees, appointing stewards, establishing policies, launching glossaries, defining ownership, creating workflows, deploying governance tools, implementing issue management, creating escalation processes. This is where governance becomes visible across the enterprise. Hashtag Activity 4. Embed data governance. This may be the most important activity of all, because governance cannot remain a project. It must become part of organizational DNA. Embedding governance means including governance within SDLC, including governance within project approvals, including governance within risk management, including governance within procurement, including governance within reporting processes, including governance within operational controls. A governance program succeeds only when people stop thinking about governance as a separate initiative. Instead, governance becomes part of daily work. Now, let's move to the bottom section. Who participates in governance? DAMA highlights 4 key participants. Let's discuss each one. Chief Data Officer, CDO. The CDO acts as executive leader. The CDO provides authority, vision, funding justification, strategic direction, executive influence, cross-functional coordination. The CDO is often the visible face of governance. However, governance cannot depend entirely on the CDO. It must become institutionalized. Steering committees. These represent executive authority. Senior leaders, business executives, risk executives, compliance leaders, technology leaders. Their responsibility is not operational work. Their responsibility is decision-making, funding, priority setting, conflict resolution, strategic direction. Data stewards. Stewards are the operational champions of governance. They understand the data. They define business meaning. They resolve definition conflicts. They maintain metadata. They coordinate quality improvement. If the CDO is the architect, stewards are the builders. Enterprise architects ensure governance aligns with technology and architecture. They connect governance policies with technical implementation. Without architects, governance risks becoming disconnected from reality. Governance tools. Now let's discuss an area where organizations frequently become confused. The diagram lists several tools: business glossary, workflow tools, intranet portals. Notice something important. DAMA calls them tools, not governance. Tools support governance. They do not create governance. A business glossary stores definitions. A workflow tool manages approvals. An intranet portal publishes policies. None of these establish accountability. Only governance does that. I often see organizations purchasing expensive data catalogs and announcing, "We now have data governance." No, they have a governance tool. The governance capability still needs policies, ownership, accountability, stewardship, and executive sponsorship. Deliverables. Finally, we reach the outputs. What does governance produce? What tangible value emerges? The slide identifies 4 major deliverables. Deliverable 1, Data Governance Strategy and Framework. This is the blueprint, the operating model, roles, responsibilities, processes, decision rights, governance structure. Deliverable 2, Business Glossary, one of the most important governance artifacts. The glossary establishes common language, customer, revenue, risk exposure, trade date, product, account. Every critical term receives an approved definition. When everyone uses the same language, confusion decreases dramatically. Deliverable 3. Data policies. Policies define expected behavior. What must happen? Who is accountable? What standards apply? What controls are required? Policies create authority. Standards create consistency. Procedures create execution. Deliverable 4. Data Governance Scorecard. This is governance measurement. Without metrics, governance becomes invisible. Scorecards demonstrate compliance, issue resolution, stewardship participation, policy adoption, business value, governance effectiveness. CDMP examination trap. Now let's discuss the exam tip. DAMA warns candidates to distinguish between governance deliverables and data management tools. You may see a question asking, which is a governance deliverable? Business glossary, governance strategy, policy framework, scorecard. These are deliverables. You may also see ETL tool, database, data warehouse, data integration platform. These are management technologies, not governance deliverables. The distinction matters. The most successful governance programs I've seen across banking, commodities trading, and enterprise transformation share one characteristic. They follow a repeatable life cycle. They begin with business strategy. They assess maturity. They establish governance. They implement governance. They embed governance. They measure governance, and they continuously improve governance. That is exactly what this DAMA context diagram represents. A repeatable enterprise capability. Not a project, not a committee, not a technology platform, a capability. As we conclude this slide, remember the flow. Inputs drive governance activities. Governance activities involve participants and tools. Governance activities produce deliverables. That simple life cycle appears repeatedly in CDMP exam scenarios. Master it, understand it, and you will immediately recognize many exam answers. In the next slide, we move into one of the most heavily tested topics in Chapter 3. Governance operating models. Centralized, replicated, federated, and understanding exactly when each model should be used. Let's move to Slide 5, Architecting the Operating Model. Welcome back, everyone. We now arrive at one of the most important and most frequently tested topics in DAMA DMBoK Chapter 3, the Data Governance Operating Model. If data governance is the constitution of enterprise data management, then the operating model determines how that constitution is applied across the organization. In simple terms, who makes decisions? Where are decisions made? How much authority is centralized? How much authority is delegated? How are standards enforced across business units? These questions define the governance operating model. And if you've ever worked in a large enterprise, you'll know this isn't just a governance issue. It's a political issue, an organizational issue, a cultural issue, and often a funding issue. Because different business units usually want different levels of control. Why operating models matter. Imagine you're the chief data officer of a global bank. You have retail banking, corporate banking, investment banking, risk, finance, treasury, operations, technology. Every one of these functions uses data. Everyone believes its data is unique. Everyone wants autonomy. Now imagine telling all of them, from tomorrow, all data decisions will be made centrally. What do you think happens? Resistance immediately, because governance is not just about control. It's about balancing control with flexibility. And that's exactly what this slide teaches. The 3 governance operating models, DAMA introduces 3 major operating models. 1. Centralized. 2. Replicated. 3. Federated. Understanding when to use each model is critical for both CDMP success and real-world governance implementation. Model 1. Centralized governance. Let's begin with the first model, the centralized model. Look at the diagram. At the top, sits a single data governance function. Below it are multiple business regions or business units. Notice something important. Authority flows downward from one central governing body. There is one governance organization, one governance council, one governance authority, one set of enterprise standards, one decision-making structure. Hashtag advantages of centralized governance. The biggest benefit is consistency. Everyone follows the same rules. Everyone uses the same definitions. Everyone follows the same standards. Everyone reports using the same governance framework. This significantly reduces ambiguity. Imagine a mid-sized insurance company operating in one country. Customer data is relatively standardized. Products are similar. Regulatory requirements are consistent. In this environment, centralized governance can work extremely well. Why? Because complexity is manageable. The organization benefits from standardized policies, lower governance costs, simplified decision-making, consistent reporting, unified stewardship, reduced duplication. Challenges of centralized governance. Now let's discuss the limitations. Centralized governance can become a bottleneck. Every decision must pass through the central body. Every exception requires approval. Every local requirement competes for attention. As organizations grow larger, this becomes problematic. Imagine a multinational bank operating in United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, India. Different regulations, different products, different customer expectations, different market structures. One central governance team may struggle to respond quickly. This often creates frustration. Business units feel disconnected. Local innovation slows. Governance becomes perceived as bureaucracy. CDMP exam hint. When the exam describes small organizations, single product companies, limited geographic complexity, strong central control, the answer is often centralized governance. Model 2. Replicated governance. Now let's move to the second model, replicated governance. This model looks very different. Notice that each business unit has its own governance function. Business Unit 1 has governance. Business Unit 2 has governance. Business Unit 3 has governance. Each operates independently. Think of a large holding company. For example, a conglomerate owning an insurance company, a retail company, a manufacturing company, a logistics company. Each business may operate almost like a separate enterprise. Each has different customers, different regulations, different systems, different priorities. Forcing all of them into one governance structure may not make sense. Instead, each business creates its own governance framework, its own council, its own policies, its own stewards, its own priorities. Benefits of replicated governance: high autonomy, fast local decisions, flexible governance structures, rapid adaptation to local needs. Business leaders generally like this model because they retain control. Governance remains close to operational realities. Challenges of replicated governance. The biggest challenge is inconsistency. Different definitions emerge. Different policies evolve. Different standards develop. Different metrics appear. Eventually, the enterprise begins speaking multiple data languages. For example, Business Unit A defines customer one way. Business Unit B defines customer differently. Business Unit C defines customer differently again. Suddenly, enterprise reporting becomes difficult. Analytics become inconsistent. Master data initiatives become painful. Integration costs increase. This is why replicated governance often struggles in organizations seeking enterprise-wide analytics and reporting. CDMP exam hint. If the scenario describes independent subsidiaries, holding companies, autonomous divisions, separate governance structures, minimal enterprise integration, the answer may be replicated governance. Model 3, federated governance. Now we arrive at the model DAMA loves, and the model the CDMP exam loves even more. The federated model. If you're taking notes, write this down. When in doubt, the answer is often federated governance. Not always, but very frequently. Why? Because federated governance solves the biggest governance challenge. How do we maintain enterprise standards while preserving local flexibility? The federated model provides exactly that balance. Look carefully at the diagram. At the top exists enterprise data governance. Below that sit multiple business units. Inside those business units exist local subject areas and local governance responsibilities. This creates two layers of authority: enterprise authority, local authority. The enterprise layer governs shared data, common definitions, enterprise standards, cross-functional policies, critical data elements, master data, regulatory controls, enterprise metadata. The local layer governs business-specific data, local operational processes, business unit-specific rules, local workflows, domain-specific requirements. Why federated governance dominates large enterprises. Let's examine a real-world example. Consider a global bank. The bank requires one enterprise definition of customer, legal entity, product, account, risk exposure, country, currency. Those definitions cannot vary across business units. Otherwise, enterprise reporting becomes impossible. However, the investment bank may have unique data requirements. The retail bank may have unique customer attributes. Treasury may have specialized reporting needs. Risk may require additional classifications. These local requirements also matter. Federated governance allows both realities to coexist. Enterprise consistency, local flexibility. This is why most large mature organizations eventually adopt some form of federated governance. Hashtag real-world example. At organizations like JP Morgan, Barclays, or large energy trading firms, governance rarely exists as purely centralized or purely decentralized. Instead, enterprise standards are established centrally. Domain governance occurs locally. Stewardship exists within business units. Critical decisions escalate upward when needed. This balance enables scale, and scale is exactly what large enterprises need. Hashtag the exam tip on this slide. Look carefully at the note at the bottom. It says, if a scenario asks for a model allowing local autonomy while maintaining enterprise standards for shared data, the answer is always federated. This is one of the highest value exam tips in Chapter 3. Expect scenarios such as, a global company wants standard customer definitions but local product flexibility. A multinational bank wants enterprise ownership of master data but local stewardship of business unit attributes. Federated. An organization wants one governance framework while preserving regional operational independence. Federated. These scenarios appear repeatedly on CDMP examinations. Now, comparing the three models. Let's simplify everything. Centralized, one governance authority, maximum consistency, minimum flexibility, best for smaller organizations. Replicated, independent governance structures, maximum flexibility, minimum consistency, best for highly autonomous businesses. Federated, shared governance authority, shared standards, local flexibility, best for large enterprises. Executive decision framework. If I were advising a board of directors, I would ask 5 questions. How many business units exist? How many countries operate independently? How much shared data exists? How important is enterprise reporting? How much autonomy is required? The answers determine the model. There is no universally correct operating model. There is only the model that best aligns with organizational complexity and strategic objectives. Hashtag CDMP memory shortcut. For exam preparation, remember, centralized equals control, replicated equals autonomy, federated equals balance. And remember one more thing, When the question includes both enterprise standards and local flexibility, DAMA almost always wants you to choose the federated model. As we conclude this slide, understand that governance structures alone do not make decisions. People make decisions. Which brings us to the next major topic. Who governs? Who owns governance? Who funds governance? Who resolves conflicts? Who establishes authority? In the next slide, we examine the governance leadership structure itself. The Chief Data Officer, steering committees, governance councils, data governance offices, and stewardship teams. This is where governance authority becomes organizational reality. Let's move to slide 6, governance committees and the Chief Data Officer. Welcome back, everyone. In the previous slide, we discussed governance operating models. We learned how organizations structure governance authority through centralized, replicated, and federated models. But a governance model alone does not make decisions. A governance model is just a structure. The real question is, who actually governs? Who approves standards? Who resolves conflicts? Who owns policies? Who decides priorities? Who funds governance initiatives? Who ensures compliance? Who has authority when two business units disagree? That is exactly what this slide addresses, because governance is ultimately about decision-making, and decision-making requires people. The most successful governance programs I've seen in banking, energy trading, and enterprise transformation programs were never successful because of technology. They were successful because they had the right governance structure and the right people exercising authority. This slide introduces the leadership ecosystem that makes governance work. Governance is not democracy. Let's begin with a reality many organizations learn the hard way. Data governance is not democracy. Everyone can contribute. Everyone can provide input. Everyone can raise issues, but not everyone can make decisions. Because governance requires authority, and authority requires structure. Without structure, meetings become endless discussions. Policies never get approved. Issues remain unresolved. Business units create their own definitions, and governance collapses. DAMA solves this problem through clearly defined governance bodies. Each body has a specific role. Each body has defined authority. Each body operates at a different level. Together, they create a governance hierarchy. At the top, executive sponsorship. Look at the governance pyramid. At the very top sits executive sponsorship. This is where governance begins. Not with data stewards, not with metadata tools, not with quality dashboards, with executive leadership. Why? Because governance changes behavior, and behavior change requires authority. Imagine telling a business unit, you must change your customer definition, or you must adopt enterprise standards, or you must fund stewardship activities. Without executive backing, those requests become suggestions. With executive backing, they become organizational priorities. This is why DAMA consistently emphasizes executive sponsorship as the most critical success factor for governance. Not with data stewards, not with metadata tools. Now let's discuss one of the most important roles in modern data organizations, the Chief Data Officer. Over the past decade, the CDO role has become one of the fastest growing executive positions worldwide. Why? Because executives realized data had become too important to manage informally. Think about other enterprise assets. Finance has a CFO. Technology has a CIO. Operations has a COO. Risk has a CRO. Why should data not have executive ownership? That realization created the Chief Data Officer role. What does a CDO actually do? Many people misunderstand the role. The CDO is not the Chief Database Administrator. The CDO is not the Chief Data Engineer. The CDO is not responsible for writing ETL jobs. The CDO governs. The CDO typically defines enterprise data strategy, establishes governance frameworks, secures executive sponsorship, resolves cross-functional conflicts, drives data quality initiatives, leads stewardship programs, coordinates regulatory compliance, measures governance effectiveness, and promotes data culture. Notice something important. Almost none of these responsibilities are technical. Most are organizational. Most are strategic. Most involve influence rather than direct control. Imagine retail banking defines a customer one way. Corporate banking defines a customer differently. Risk uses a third definition. Finance uses a fourth. Now enterprise reporting becomes impossible. Who resolves this conflict? A database administrator? No. A developer? No. A data engineer? No. The CDO. Because governance conflicts require enterprise authority. The Governance Council below executive sponsorship sits the Governance Council. This is one of the most important governance bodies. Think of the Governance Council as the parliament of enterprise data governance. The council typically includes business executives, data owners, risk leaders, compliance representatives, technology leaders, operations leaders, stewardship representatives. The council's responsibility is not operational execution. Its responsibility is decision-making. Typical decisions include approving policies, resolving ownership disputes, approving standards, prioritizing governance initiatives, approving funding, escalating major issues, monitoring governance performance. When governance issues cross departmental boundaries, they usually arrive here. Why governance councils matter. Most enterprise data problems are not technical, they are organizational. Let's examine a simple example. Marketing wants one customer hierarchy, finance wants another, operations prefers a third. Technology can build any of them. Technology isn't the problem. Agreement is the problem. Governance councils exist to create organizational alignment. Without them, every business unit optimizes for itself. With them, the enterprise optimizes collectively. Data Governance Office, DGO. Now let's move to the operational heart of governance, the Data Governance Office, sometimes called Governance Office, Data Office, Chief Data Office, Enterprise Data Governance Team. Think of this group as the program management function for governance. The Governance Council sets direction. The Governance Office executes that direction. Responsibilities often include facilitating governance meetings, managing issue logs, maintaining policies, managing stewardship programs, tracking metrics, preparing scorecards, managing governance workflows, supporting governance tools, coordinating training, managing communications. If the Governance Council is the board of directors, the Governance Office is the operational headquarters. Data owners. Now we move into one of the most heavily tested CDMP topics, data ownership. A data owner is accountable for a specific data domain. Examples include customer data owner, product data owner, supplier data owner, trade data owner, risk data owner, employee data owner. Ownership means accountability, not operational work. This distinction is important. Who can access data? What quality standards apply? What policies govern usage? How issues are prioritized? What definitions are approved? The owner is accountable for outcomes, even if someone else performs the work. Data stewards. Now we reach the role most commonly associated with governance, the data steward. If the owner is accountable, the steward is responsible. Stewards work closely with data every day. They understand business meaning, business processes, business rules, definitions, data quality issues, operational realities. Typical stewardship responsibilities include managing definitions, maintaining metadata, monitoring quality, resolving issues, supporting governance processes, documenting business rules, coordinating remediation. This role appears constantly on CDMP exams. Hashtag CDMP exam shortcut. Remember, owner equals accountable, steward equals responsible. This aligns closely with RACI principles. The owner decides, the steward coordinates, the owner approves, the steward executes, the owner provides authority, the steward provides operational governance. Data custodians. Now let's discuss another commonly misunderstood role. Data custodians. These are usually IT professionals, database administrators, infrastructure teams, cloud platform teams, technology support teams. Custodians protect and maintain data. They provide technical controls, they manage backups, security, storage, availability, performance. But they do not own data, and they do not govern data. This distinction appears frequently in CDMP exams. A custodian protects data. A steward manages governance activities. An owner provides accountability. A CDO provides enterprise leadership. Escalation hierarchy. Now let's look at how governance issues flow. Suppose a data quality issue occurs. A steward identifies it. If the steward cannot resolve it, the issue escalates to the owner. If the owner cannot resolve it, the issue escalates to the governance council. If the issue impacts enterprise strategy, the issue escalates to executive leadership. This hierarchy ensures decisions occur at the appropriate level. Not every issue requires executive involvement. Not every issue should remain operational. Governance creates a structured decision pathway. Why governance structures fail? In my experience across JP Morgan, Barclays, NatWest, and large-scale transformation programs, governance structures fail for predictable reasons. No executive sponsorship, no clear ownership, no stewardship accountability, no escalation process, no decision authority, no business engagement. Organizations often build committees, but committees without authority achieve very little. The most successful governance structures have one common characteristic. Decision rights are crystal clear. Everyone knows who approves, everyone knows who executes, everyone knows who is accountable. CDMP examination focus areas. Expect questions around CDO responsibilities, ownership versus stewardship, governance councils, escalation paths, accountability structures, decision rights, RACI concepts, governance offices. One of the most common exam questions asks, who is accountable for data quality? The answer is typically the data owner, not the steward, not IT, not the custodian. Memory framework. For quick recall, CDO, enterprise leadership. Governance council, enterprise decisions. Governance office, program coordination. Data owner, accountability. Data steward, operational governance. Data custodian, technical support. If you memorize this hierarchy, you'll answer a large number of governance questions correctly. As we conclude this slide, remember, governance succeeds when authority, accountability, responsibility, and execution are clearly separated. The CDO provides leadership. The council provides decisions. Owners provide accountability. Stewards provide operational governance. Custodians provide technical support. Together, they form the governance ecosystem. In the next slide, we move into another major CDMP topic: data governance policies, standards, controls, and decision rights. This is where governance authority is translated into practical rules that guide organizational behavior. Let's move to slide 7, policies, standards, and decision rights. Welcome back, everyone. We have now reached one of the most important and most misunderstood topics in data governance: data stewardship. If data governance provides authority and control, data stewardship provides operational leadership. In almost every governance program I have seen across banking, capital markets, energy trading, risk management, and enterprise transformation, stewardship ultimately determines whether governance succeeds or fails. Why? Because governance councils don't interact with data every day. Chief data officers don't review every business rule. Steering committees don't define metadata. Executives don't monitor data quality exceptions daily. Stewards do. Stewards are where governance meets reality. And this is exactly why CDMP exams place enormous emphasis on stewardship roles. What is a data steward? Let's start with the DAMA definition shown on the slide. A data steward is a recognized subject matter expert, managing data assets on behalf of others in the best interests of the organization. Notice something very important. The definition does not say owner, manager, custodian, developer, administrator. Instead, it says subject matter expert. This distinction is critical. Stewards understand the business meaning of data. They understand how data is created, how it is used, how it flows, what it represents, what quality issues exist, what business rules apply. Think of a steward as the guardian of meaning, not the guardian of technology. Meaning, because most governance failures are not technical failures, they are meaning failures. Real-world example. Imagine you're working at a global bank. The term customer appears in 300 systems. Now imagine asking 10 departments, what is a customer? You receive 10 different answers. Marketing says, someone who is purchased. Finance says, someone who has been invoiced. Operations says, someone who has been onboarded. Risk says, someone with exposure. Compliance says, someone who completed KYC. Technology says, someone represented in a database table. Who resolves these differences? Not the database administrator, not the ETL developer, not the architect, the steward. Because stewardship is about business meaning. Why stewardship exists? Governance creates policies. Governance creates standards. Governance creates authority. But governance cannot personally enforce every decision. Someone must operationalize governance. Someone must maintain definitions. Someone must monitor quality. Someone must coordinate issue resolution. Someone must represent the business. That role belongs to stewards. This is why mature organizations often describe stewardship as the operational arm of governance. Governance decides. Stewardship executes governance. Understanding the stewardship hierarchy. Now let's examine the stewardship roles presented on the slide. This hierarchy appears frequently in large enterprises. Understanding the differences is important for both CDMP and real-world governance. Chief Data Steward. At the top, we find the Chief Data Steward. This role typically exists in organizations without a formal Chief Data Officer. The slide notes, chairs data governance bodies in lieu of a CDO. Think of this role as the senior-most stewardship authority. Responsibilities often include enterprise stewardship leadership, governance coordination, policy oversight, stewardship program management, escalation management, cross-functional alignment. In smaller organizations, this role may effectively perform many CDO responsibilities. Executive Data Steward. Now we move to Executive Data Stewards. These are typically senior leaders, business executives, senior managers, department heads. The slide notes, strategic oversight. These individuals operate at the governance level, not the operational level. They help approve policies, resolve enterprise conflicts, provide sponsorship, drive accountability, represent business interests. Think of them as the bridge between executive leadership and operational stewardship. Hashtag Enterprise Data Steward. Now we enter one of the most powerful governance roles, the Enterprise Data Steward. The slide describes cross-functional oversight across business units. Enterprise stewards focus on data domains that span multiple departments. Examples include customer data, product data, legal entity data, counterparty data, employee data, supplier data. Why is this role necessary? Because enterprise data rarely belongs to a single department. Customer information may be used by sales, marketing, finance, risk, compliance, operations, analytics, technology. Someone must ensure consistency across all those groups. That is the enterprise steward's responsibility. Example from banking at JP Morgan or Barclays, customer data touches nearly every business function. If retail banking changes a customer definition, the impact may affect regulatory reporting, AML monitoring, credit risk, trading, treasury, finance, customer analytics. Enterprise stewards ensure decisions are coordinated across the entire organization. Business data steward. Now we arrive at the most common stewardship role, the business data steward. This is often where governance becomes operational. The slide highlights definitions and rules, accountability for a subset of data, business glossary ownership. Business stewards are typically experts within a specific domain. Examples: customer steward, trade steward, risk steward, finance steward, product steward, market data steward. Their daily activities often include defining business terms, maintaining metadata, resolving quality issues, reviewing standards, supporting governance initiatives, managing glossary entries, documenting business rules. These individuals often become the go-to experts for specific data domains. Data owner versus data steward. Now we arrive at one of the biggest CDMP examination traps. Many candidates confuse data owners and data stewards. The exam tests this constantly. Let's clarify. The slide identifies data owners as authority, approval rights, decision-making authority. A data owner has legal and business accountability. They approve, they authorize, they accept risk, they make final decisions. A data steward supports those decisions. The steward prepares recommendations. The steward manages governance activities. The steward coordinates execution. Think of it this way: the owner signs, the steward prepares. Hacks. Suppose a business unit wants to change the definition of customer profitability. Who researches the impact? The steward. Who consults stakeholders? The steward. Who updates glossary entries? The steward. Who prepares recommendations? The steward. Who gives final approval? The owner. This distinction appears repeatedly in CDMP exam questions. Technical data steward. Now let's discuss a role many organizations struggle to define: the technical data steward. The slide notes IT context, technical standards, execution. Unlike business stewards, technical stewards focus on implementation. Examples include database standards, ETL controls, data lineage, metadata integration, reference architectures, data quality implementation, technical metadata. Technical stewards understand how data moves through systems. Business stewards understand what data means. Both roles are important, but they serve different purposes. #CDMP Exam Gold Nugget. Look carefully at the exam tip on this slide. It says, the CDMP loves testing the difference between business stewards and technical stewards. Memorize this distinction. Business steward focuses on definitions, rules, policies, business meaning, quality requirements, governance. Technical steward focuses on implementation, databases, ETL, lineage, architecture, technical controls. Simple memory trick. Business stewards define, technical stewards implement. #coordinating data steward. Now let's discuss a role common in complex organizations: the coordinating data steward. The slide notes alignment, cross-functional leadership. Imagine a governance issue impacting finance, risk, compliance, operations, technology, analytics. Who brings everyone together? Who facilitates discussions? Who coordinates decisions? Who tracks actions? Who ensures alignment? Often, this responsibility belongs to a coordinating steward. Think of them as governance project managers. Why stewardship programs fail. Over the years, I've observed recurring patterns. Organizations assign stewardship roles, publish governance documents, conduct training, Then 6 months later, everything stops. Why? Because stewardship becomes a secondary responsibility. People are assigned stewardship work but receive no authority, no incentives, no objectives, no performance metrics, no executive support. Successful stewardship programs include clear responsibilities, formal accountability, training, recognition, performance measurement, executive sponsorship. Without these elements, stewardship becomes a title. With them, stewardship becomes a capability. Hashtag what world-class stewards actually do. Best stewards I've worked with across investment banking, risk management, and commodities trading consistently perform 6 activities. They define business terminology, they manage metadata, they improve data quality, they resolve issues, they educate stakeholders, they champion governance. Notice how few of these activities involve technology. Most involve communication, coordination, facilitation, influence, and organizational leadership. CDMP exam scenarios expect questions such as, who maintains business definitions? Business steward. Who approves data access policy exceptions? Data owner. Who defines database implementation standards? Technical steward. Who coordinates enterprise-wide stewardship activities? Coordinating steward. Who chairs governance bodies in the absence of a CDO? Chief data steward. These distinctions frequently appear in scenario-based questions. Governance is the brain of the organization. Stewardship is the nervous system. The brain can make decisions, but without a nervous system, decisions never reach the rest of the body. That is the role of stewardship. Stewards carry governance into daily operations. They transform policies into actions, standards into controls, decisions into outcomes. And that is why the most mature organizations invest heavily in stewardship programs. Because governance without stewardship is merely theory. Stewardship transforms governance into practice. As we conclude this slide, remember the most important takeaway. Data owners possess authority. Data stewards provide operational governance. Business stewards define meaning. Technical stewards implement controls. Master these distinctions, and you'll answer a large percentage of CDMP Chapter 3 questions correctly. In the next slide, we move into another major exam topic: data strategy, policies, standards, and procedures. This is where governance authority becomes formalized into rules that guide enterprise behavior. Let's move to slide 8, formulating strategy, policies, and standards. Welcome back, everyone. We have now reached one of the most important governance slides in the entire DAMA DMBoK Chapter 3. And if you're preparing for the CDMP exam, pay very close attention because this slide contains one of the most frequently tested concepts in the entire governance chapter: the distinction between strategy, principles, policies, standards, procedures. Most organizations use these words interchangeably. DAMA does not. The CDMP exam certainly does not. And many candidates lose marks because they fail to understand the hierarchy shown on this slide. Today we're going to eliminate that confusion permanently. Why this matters? Let's start with a simple question. Imagine your organization wants to improve customer data quality. How do you make that happen? Do you immediately create database validations? Do you immediately build ETL controls? Do you immediately deploy software? No. Governance always begins at a higher level. First comes strategy, then principles, then policies, then standards, then procedures. Only after that does implementation begin. Think of governance as constructing a skyscraper. You don't start by pouring concrete. You start with a vision, then architecture, then engineering designs, then construction standards, then operating instructions. The governance hierarchy works exactly the same way. Hashtag Level 1, Data Strategy. Let's start at the top of the governance pyramid. Data strategy. The slide defines strategy as defining scope and roadmap driven by business strategy. Notice something important. Strategy is not about technology. Strategy is not about tools. Strategy is not about implementation. Strategy is about direction. Strategy answers questions such as, why are we investing in governance? What business outcomes are we pursuing? What risks are we trying to reduce? What capabilities must we build? Where do we want to be in 3 years? For example, a bank may define its strategy as create trusted enterprise customer data to improve regulatory reporting and customer experience. Notice, this is not a technical statement. It is a business outcome. Similarly, an energy trading company may define establish enterprise governance over trading and risk data to support real-time decision-making. Again, business-driven, not technology-driven. This is why DAMA repeatedly states data strategy must align with business strategy. Number 1, Level 2, Goals and Principles. Now we move one level deeper. The slide identifies goals and principles. Think of principles as governance beliefs, fundamental truths, guiding philosophies, long-term rules of behavior. Examples include data is an enterprise asset. Data quality is everyone's responsibility. Data must have ownership. Metadata must be maintained. Critical data must be governed. Notice these are not detailed instructions. They're guiding principles. They provide direction for future decisions. A principle remains stable for years, sometimes decades, because principles define organizational philosophy. Real-world example. At a global bank, one principle might be, there shall be one authoritative source for critical customer data. That principle can influence hundreds of future decisions. It affects master data management, reporting, risk systems, analytics, compliance, data quality, metadata. A single principle can drive an entire governance program. Level 3, Data Policies. Now we reach one of the most tested topics in CDMP, policies. The slide defines policies as global directives describing what must be done. This definition is critical. Policies define what, not how. Let's repeat that. Policies define what must happen. Standards define how it should happen. This distinction appears constantly in examinations. How is a policy? A policy is an authoritative statement, a formal rule, an organizational requirement, a mandatory expectation. Examples. All critical data elements must have an assigned owner. Customer data must comply with privacy regulations. All business terms must be documented. Sensitive data must be classified. Data quality metrics must be monitored. Notice something important. None of these explain implementation. They simply state organizational requirements. Now, policy characteristics. Policies are enterprise-wide, mandatory, business-oriented, approved by governance authorities, focused on outcomes. Policies answer what must be achieved, not how should it be achieved. Now, common CDMP exam trap. Suppose a question states, passwords must contain 12 characters, 1 number, 1 special character, and 1 uppercase letter. Many candidates identify this as a policy. That is incorrect. It is too detailed. That is a standard. A policy would be, all user accounts must comply with enterprise security requirements. High level, directive, outcome focused. Remember, policies define what, not how. Now hashtag Level 4 Data Standards. Now we move one level deeper. The slide defines standards as specific rules describing how to do something. This is where implementation guidance begins. Standards are more detailed, more precise, more measurable, more operational. Examples: customer IDs must be 12 characters. Date fields must use YYYMMDD format. Email addresses must conform to approved validation rules. Data quality scores must exceed 95%. Metadata attributes must follow naming conventions. Notice the difference. Policies tell us what is required. Standards explain how compliance will be achieved. Banking example. Let's use a practical example. Policy. All customer records must be uniquely identifiable. Standard. Customer IDs shall contain 12 alphanumeric characters and be generated through the Enterprise Customer Master System. See the difference? Policy equals what? Standard equals how. This distinction is one of the highest value concepts for the CDMP exam. Why standards matter? Without standards, every team creates its own approach. Every application uses different formats. Every project invents new definitions. Consistency disappears. Standards create repeatability, consistency, scalability, interoperability, compliance. Governance becomes enforceable only when standards exist. Level 5. Procedures. At the bottom of the hierarchy, we find procedures. The slide describes procedures as documented methods and steps to accomplish activities. Procedures are the most detailed level. They provide step-by-step instructions. Procedures answer exactly how someone performs a task. Examples: how to approve a new business term, how to onboard a data steward, how to create a glossary entry, how to classify sensitive data, how to escalate a data quality issue. Think of procedures as operational playbooks. Hashtag strategy versus policy versus standard versus procedure. Let's simplify everything. Hashtag strategy. Where are we going? Hashtag principle. What do we believe? Hashtag policy. What must happen? Hashtag standard. What exact steps should be followed? This hierarchy appears repeatedly throughout governance frameworks, and it appears repeatedly on CDMP exams. The policy implementation flow. Now let's examine the process shown on the right side of the slide. Notice the sequence: drafted by data management professionals, reviewed by stewards, approved by governance council, enforced via SDLC. This process is extremely important because governance follows a formal life cycle. Step 1. Drafting. Typically, governance specialists, architects, compliance experts, or data professionals create initial drafts. These drafts reflect business needs and governance objectives. Step 2. Steward review. Stewards review practical implications. Will this work? Can it be implemented? Does it align with business realities? Are definitions clear? Stewards act as reality check mechanisms. Step 3. Governance council approval. This is where authority enters. Policies require formal approval. Why? Because policies create obligations, and obligations require organizational authority. Without governance approval, a policy is merely a suggestion. Step 4. Enforcement. Now we arrive at implementation. The slide highlights SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle. This is where governance becomes operational. Policies and standards are embedded into projects, applications. Controls, workflows, approvals, quality checks, metadata processes. This is why governance must integrate with operational processes. Otherwise, policies remain documents nobody follows. Executive perspective. One of the biggest mistakes organizations make is jumping directly to standards and procedures without first defining strategy and policy. The result? Lots of activity, very little alignment. Successful organizations work from the top down. Strategy drives principles. Principles drive policies. Policies drive standards. Standards drive procedures. Procedures drive implementation. Implementation delivers business outcomes. That sequence is how governance creates value. Hashtag CDMP Exam Gold Nugget. Look carefully at the exam tip on this slide. It says, memorize this cold. Policy is what to do and what not to do. Standard procedure is how to do it. If you remember only one thing from this slide, remember that. Because it appears repeatedly in governance scenario questions. Memory framework for exam preparation, strategy direction, principles beliefs, policies what, standards how, procedures step by step. Memorize this hierarchy. It will help you answer a significant number of Chapter 3 questions correctly. As we conclude this slide, remember, governance becomes actionable only when strategy is translated into policies, standards, and procedures. Without policies, governance lacks authority. Without standards, governance lacks consistency. Without procedures, governance lacks execution. Together, they form the governance control framework that enables enterprise-wide accountability. In the next slide, we move into another critical governance capability, issue management and escalation. Because no matter how good your policies are, governance ultimately gets tested when conflicts arise, ownership is disputed, or data quality issues impact the business. Let's move to slide 9, issue management and escalation framework. Welcome back, everyone. Up until now, we've discussed governance structures, operating models, stewardship, policies, standards, and decision-making authority. But now we arrive at the moment where governance proves its value. Because governance isn't tested when everything is working. Governance is tested when things go wrong, when reports don't reconcile, when customer counts differ, when data quality drops, when regulatory deadlines are missed, when business units disagree, when nobody knows who owns the data, when millions of dollars are at stake. That is where issue management enters. And in mature organizations, issue management is one of the most visible and measurable governance capabilities. The reality of enterprise data. Let's begin with an uncomfortable truth. No organization has perfect data. Not banks, not healthcare organizations, not energy companies, not governments, not technology companies. Nobody. Will data issues occur? The question is, how quickly can we identify, manage, resolve, and prevent them? That capability is called data issue management. Think about some common enterprise problems. A regulatory report shows different numbers than finance reports. Customer records contain duplicate identifiers. Risk systems classify the same entity differently. Data lineage cannot be demonstrated to auditors. A GDPR request cannot be fulfilled. A critical report contains inaccurate information. These are not technology problems. These are governance problems. Because governance exists to ensure accountability and resolution. Why issue management matters. Look at the left side of the slide. DAMA highlights several reasons. Issue management builds credibility, demonstrates control, reduces operational support burden, resolves conflicts, addresses security concerns, supports compliance. Let's explore each one. One of the biggest challenges governance programs face is skepticism. Business leaders often ask, what value does governance actually provide? Issue management provides a visible answer. When governance resolves recurring data problems, executives notice, auditors notice, business users notice, regulators notice. Over time, governance gains credibility, not because of policies, not because of frameworks, because it solves real business problems. Demonstrating control. Regulators care deeply about control, particularly in financial services. Imagine an auditor asks, how do you manage data quality issues? A mature organization can demonstrate issue identification, issue classification, ownership assignment, escalation workflows, resolution tracking, root cause analysis, Closure validation. Without issue management, organizations cannot demonstrate governance effectiveness. Reducing operational support. Many organizations spend enormous amounts of time fixing the same data problems repeatedly. Every month, every quarter, every year. Governance changes the conversation. Instead of fixing symptoms repeatedly, governance focuses on root causes. Example: a report continually fails because customer identifiers are inconsistent. The operational response is, fix the report, again and again and again. The governance response is, why does the issue exist? Who owns the data? Which standard is missing? What control failed? How do we prevent recurrence? Governance focuses on sustainable solutions. The escalation pyramid. Now let's move to the centerpiece of this slide, the escalation framework. This pyramid is one of the most important diagrams in Chapter 3, and yes, it appears regularly in CDMP examinations. The pyramid shows 3 escalation levels: operational, strategic, executive. As issues become more complex and impactful, they move upward. Level 1, stewardship teams. At the bottom of the pyramid, we find business unit data governance teams, data stewards, operational governance groups. This level resolves approximately 80 to 85% of all issues. That's an important number. Memorize it. Most governance issues are not strategic. Most are operational. Examples include definition clarification, metadata updates, data quality remediation, business rule interpretation, minor ownership disputes, standard compliance issues. Stewards resolve these issues quickly because they understand the data. Example: suppose marketing and finance use slightly different definitions of active customer. A steward can facilitate discussions, review business rules, update glossary definitions, reach consensus, resolve the issue. No executive involvement required. This is exactly how mature governance should operate. Issues should be resolved at the lowest appropriate level. Why 80 to 85% matters? DAMA includes this metric for a reason. Effective governance prevents escalation overload. Imagine every issue reaching executive leadership. Governance would become paralyzed. Executives spend their days discussing metadata. Nobody wants that. Good stewardship absorbs most governance challenges before they become strategic problems. Level 2, Data Governance Council. Now we move upward. The second level is the Data Governance Council. The slide indicates less than 20% of issues reach this stage. These issues are more complex, more political, more strategic, more cross-functional. Examples include conflicting ownership claims, enterprise data standard disputes, cross-business unit conflicts, regulatory interpretation disagreements, funding priorities, enterprise policy exceptions. These issues require broader authority. Stewards may identify the problem, but they cannot always resolve it. The Governance Council provides that authority. Real-world banking example. Imagine retail banking and corporate banking disagree on the enterprise definition of customer profitability. Each has legitimate business requirements. Each wants its definition adopted. A steward can facilitate discussions, but final enterprise decisions belong to governance leadership. This is where the Governance Council intervenes, reviews alternatives, evaluates business impact, makes decisions, communicates outcomes. Level 3, Steering Committee. Now we reach the top of the pyramid, the Data Governance Steering Committee, the highest governance authority. According to DAMA, fewer than 5% of issues should ever reach this level. Memorize that number. Less than 5%. If large numbers of issues reach executive leadership, governance is failing somewhere below. These issues are extraordinary, enterprise-wide, high risk, highly political, highly strategic. Examples include major regulatory findings, significant compliance failures, enterprise funding decisions, cross-enterprise policy conflicts, executive accountability disputes, critical risk exposures. These situations require senior executive intervention. Why escalation matters. Many organizations focus on governance structures. Few focus on governance pathways. Governance pathways determine who decides, who approves, who escalates, when escalation occurs, what authority applies. Without clear escalation pathways, issues remain unresolved. Teams argue endlessly. Ownership becomes unclear. Risk increases. Trust declines. Escalation frameworks create clarity. Characteristics of effective issue management. Let's discuss what world-class organizations do. Across J.P. Morgan, Barclays, NatWest, ADNOC, and other large enterprises, successful issue management typically includes formal issue logs, issue prioritization, assigned ownership, defined escalation criteria, target resolution dates, root cause analysis, executive reporting, closure validation. Notice how governance transforms issue resolution into a disciplined process. Root cause thinking. One hallmark of mature governance is root cause analysis. Governance asks, why did the issue occur? What process failed? Which control failed? Which standard was missing? Who owned the process? How do we prevent recurrence? This distinguishes governance from operational firefighting. Operational teams fix symptoms. Governance fixes causes. Example: a regulatory report contains incorrect customer classifications. Operational response: correct the report. Submit revised numbers. Governance response: why were classifications incorrect? Which definition was unclear? Which steward approved it? Which standard was violated? Which control failed? How do we prevent recurrence? That is governance thinking. Hashtag Governance Maturity Indicator. One of the strongest indicators of governance maturity is issue resolution effectiveness. Mature organizations can answer: how many issues exist? How many are open? How many are overdue? How many escalated? What are the root causes? Which domains generate the most issues? How quickly are issues resolved? Immature organizations cannot answer these questions. Hashtag CDMP Exam Gold Nugget. Look carefully at the exam tip. DAMA explicitly tells us 80 to 85% resolved by stewards. Less than 20% reach Governance Council. Less than 5% reach Steering Committee. This hierarchy appears frequently in exam scenarios. When a question describes routine operational issue, choose Stewardship. Cross-functional strategic conflict, choose Governance Council. Enterprise-level executive conflict, choose Steering Committee. This framework alone can earn several exam points. Executive perspective. The most successful governance programs aren't measured by the number of policies they publish. They're measured by their ability to resolve business problems. Issue management provides that measurement. It demonstrates governance effectiveness. It demonstrates accountability. It demonstrates organizational maturity. Because ultimately, governance exists to answer one question. When data problems occur, who owns the solution? Issue management provides that answer. As we conclude this slide, remember, governance without issue management is theory. Issue management transforms governance into an operational capability. Stewards solve most problems. Governance councils solve strategic problems. Steering committees solve enterprise problems. And together, they create a structured pathway for enterprise decision-making. In the next slide, we move into one of the biggest business drivers for data governance: regulatory compliance and data valuation. This is where governance moves beyond control and begins demonstrating measurable business value. Let's move to slide 10. Regulatory compliance and data valuation. Welcome back, everyone. We now arrive at one of the most powerful business justifications for data governance. And if you're a chief data officer, data governance lead, head of data management, or someone trying to secure executive funding for a governance program, this slide may be the most important slide in the entire chapter. Why? Because executives generally approve budgets for only two reasons: to reduce risk or to create value. This slide addresses both. On the top half, we see regulatory compliance. On the bottom half, we see data valuation. Together, they answer a critical executive question: why should we invest in data governance? The answer: because governance protects enterprise value and enables enterprise value. The number one driver of governance. Let's begin with the first section, regulatory compliance. Notice what the slide says: the number one driver. This statement is extremely important. Across industries and across countries, regulatory requirements have been one of the biggest catalysts for governance programs. In fact, many organizations didn't create formal governance programs because they wanted to. They created them because regulators demanded them. Think about banking. Following the 2008 financial crisis, regulators discovered something alarming. Many institutions could not accurately explain their data. They couldn't explain data lineage. They couldn't explain ownership. They couldn't explain risk aggregation. They couldn't explain reporting calculations. As a result, regulations such as BCBS 239, Basel III, GDPR, CCPA, MiFID II, IFRS reporting, CCAR, and Dodd-Frank began emphasizing data governance, accountability, traceability, and quality. Suddenly, data governance became a board-level discussion, not because executives suddenly loved metadata, but because non-compliance became expensive, very expensive. The cost of non-compliance. Let's think like a CFO. Imagine two scenarios. Scenario 1, you invest $5 million in governance. You establish ownership, policies, stewardship, quality controls, metadata management, compliance monitoring. Scenario 2, you invest nothing. Then regulators impose a $100 million fine. Your reputation suffers. Customers lose confidence. Shareholders question leadership. The media gets involved. Which option is cheaper? The answer is obvious. Governance is often less expensive than non-compliance. This is why compliance remains one of the strongest business cases for governance funding. The regulatory evaluation matrix. Now let's examine the framework shown on the slide. DAMA provides 3 governance questions every organization should be able to answer. These questions appear simple, but they expose governance maturity very quickly. What constitutes compliance, and what policies are required? This question sounds basic, yet many organizations struggle to answer it. For example, which customer data requires protection? Which regulations apply? Which retention periods are mandatory? Which controls are required? Which definitions are authoritative? Without governance, every department may answer differently. Governance creates a single authoritative answer. Policies define expectations. Standards define controls. Stewards ensure implementation. Owners ensure accountability. That's governance in action. Question 2. How is compliance demonstrated mathematically and historically to auditors? This is one of the most overlooked governance questions. Many organizations believe compliance means following rules. Regulators disagree. Regulators want evidence, metrics, lineage, audit trails, issue logs, stewardship records, quality reports. Approval workflows. If a regulator asks, prove your customer data quality exceeds 95%, can you provide evidence? If the answer is no, compliance does not exist, because undocumented compliance is indistinguishable from non-compliance. Governance creates the evidence framework regulators require. Question 3. What are the financial and reputational penalties of non-compliance? This is where governance becomes an executive discussion. Imagine a GDPR violation. The consequences may include financial penalties, regulatory investigations, customer lawsuits, negative media attention, reputation damage, loss of customer trust. The direct fine may be significant. The indirect cost can be far greater. Executives understand this immediately, which is why governance frequently receives support from risk management, compliance, legal, audit, finance, executive leadership. One way to think about data governance is as enterprise risk management applied to data. Traditional risk management asks, what could go wrong? How likely is it? What would it cost? How do we control it? Governance asks the same questions about data. What data risks exist? Who owns them? How are they monitored? How are they mitigated? How are they reported? This alignment between governance and risk management is one reason governance has become so important globally. Now let's move to the bottom half of the slide, and this is where the conversation becomes even more interesting. Because governance is not only about reducing risk, governance is also about creating value. Historically, organizations viewed data primarily as a cost: storage costs, processing costs, database costs, infrastructure costs, compliance costs. Today, leading organizations view data differently. They view data as an asset. And assets have value. Data as an enterprise asset. Think about the modern economy. Many of the world's most valuable companies derive enormous value from data. Customer behavior data, market data, operational data, product data, supply chain data, trading data, risk data. Without those assets, many business models would not exist. Yet, unlike buildings or machinery, data is intangible. You cannot physically touch it. You cannot store it in a warehouse. You cannot count it like inventory. This creates an important challenge. How do we determine its value? The DAMA data valuation principle. The slide presents a simple but powerful formula. Let's display it clearly. Value equals business contribution minus storage plus management costs. This formula captures a fundamental governance principle. Data value is not determined simply by possession. Data creates value when business contribution exceeds management cost. Understanding business contribution. What creates business contribution? Let's explore several examples. Customer data supports sales, marketing, customer retention, cross-selling, personalization, revenue generation. Trading data supports pricing, risk management, portfolio optimization, market intelligence, profitability. Risk data supports capital management, regulatory reporting, stress testing, credit decisions, loss prevention. Operational data improves efficiency, reduces costs, automates processes, improves decision-making. Every one of these creates measurable business value. Understanding data costs. Now let's discuss the other side of the equation. Data isn't free. Organizations incur costs related to storage, security, governance, quality monitoring, metadata management, compliance, retention, archiving, infrastructure, stewardship. As data volumes grow, these costs grow as well. The objective of governance is not merely to collect more data. The objective is to maximize net value. Practical example. Imagine a bank stores customer transaction data. The data supports fraud detection, customer analytics, regulatory reporting, credit modeling, risk analysis. Business contribution is enormous. The value significantly exceeds storage and management costs. Therefore, the data asset has high net value. Now imagine storing petabytes of unused historical data that nobody accesses, analyzes, or requires. The contribution may be minimal. The cost may be substantial. The net value becomes questionable. Governance helps organizations make these decisions intelligently. Why governance matters for valuation. Many organizations cannot answer basic questions such as, which data assets are most valuable? Who owns them? How are they measured? Which assets require investment? Which assets should be retired? Governance creates visibility. Visibility enables valuation. Valuation enables investment decisions. Without governance, data remains an unmanaged asset. With governance, data becomes a measurable business resource. Hashtag executive-level governance discussion. One of the most powerful conversations a CDO can have with executives is this. Stop talking about data quality. Start talking about business value. Executives don't fund governance because they love stewardship. Executives fund governance because governance reduces regulatory risk, protects revenue, improves customer experience, supports AI, improves decision quality, enables digital transformation, creates measurable business value. Governance becomes significantly more persuasive when discussed in terms executives understand. Risk, cost, revenue, value, return on investment. Hashtag CDMP exam gold nugget. Now let's focus on the exam tip shown on the slide. The CDMP exam frequently tests the valuation principle. Remember, data value reflects contribution offset by maintenance and management cost. If an answer focuses only on storage cost, it is incomplete. If an answer focuses only on business benefit, it is incomplete. DAMA evaluates both. Similarly, when compliance scenarios appear, always think about ownership, policies, evidence, controls, auditability, accountability. These concepts are at the heart of governance. Hashtag executive summary. The top half of this slide explains why governance exists from a risk perspective. The bottom half explains why governance exists from a value perspective. Together, they create the strongest business case for governance investment. Compliance protects the organization. Valuation enables the organization. Governance supports both. And that is why the most mature organizations no longer ask, how much does governance cost? Does governance reduce, and what value does governance create? That shift in thinking represents true governance maturity. In the next slide, we move into one of the most overlooked but critical success factors in data governance, organizational change management, OCM, because even the best governance framework will fail if people refuse to change their behavior. And as DAMA reminds us, governance is ultimately a people transformation initiative. Let's move to slide 11, Organizational Change Management, OCM. Welcome back, everyone. We now arrive at what I personally consider one of the most important slides in the entire data governance chapter. And interestingly, it is not about governance structures. It is not about policies. It is not about stewardship. It is not about metadata. It is not about technology. It is about people. Because after more than 20 years working across organizations like JP Morgan Chase, Barclays, NatWest, ADNOC, and numerous large-scale transformation programs, I can tell you something with complete confidence. Data governance rarely fails because of technology. It usually fails because people refuse to change. And that's exactly why DAMA includes Organizational Change Management, or OCM, as a core component of successful governance programs. The biggest myth in data governance. Let's begin with a common misconception. Many organizations believe governance implementation looks like this: create policies, assign owners, deploy a governance tool, create a glossary, launch stewardship, success. Reality looks very different. The actual journey often looks like create policies, people ignore them, create standards, people continue using spreadsheets, assign owners, nobody attends meetings, launch stewardship, business units resist participation, deploy a governance tool, users refuse to update metadata. Sound familiar? This happens everywhere, because governance is not fundamentally a data problem. Governance is a behavioral problem. why change management matters. Look at the left side of the slide. DAMA highlights 3 powerful observations. Observation 1. Organizational change requires individual change. Think about that carefully. Organizations do not change, people change. When executives say, "We want better data quality," what they're really saying is, people must capture data differently. People must follow standards. People must use approved definitions. People must comply with governance controls. People must take ownership. Every governance outcome ultimately depends on human behavior, which means governance success depends on changing behavior. Hashtag observation 2. Without OCM, governance programs fail due to behavioral resistance. This statement is incredibly important, and it aligns perfectly with real-world experience. Imagine implementing a business glossary. Technically, that's easy. The software works. Definitions exist. The platform is available. Yet 6 months later, nobody uses it. Why? Behavior, not technology. Imagine implementing data stewardship. Roles are defined. Processes exist. Training is completed. Yet stewards never attend meetings. Metadata remains outdated. Quality issues persist. Again, behavior, not technology. This is why governance leaders must become change leaders, not just governance experts. Now, observation 3. Data governance must become a business capability, not a temporary project. This distinction appears repeatedly throughout DAMA. Projects have start dates. Projects have end dates. Projects have budgets. Projects eventually finish. Governance never finishes. Governance becomes part of how the organization operates. Think about finance. Would anyone say, the finance project is complete? Of course not. Finance is an ongoing capability. The same is true for governance. It becomes part of organizational DNA. Now, understanding the OCM curve. Now let's examine the graph on the right side of the slide. This graph represents one of the most widely recognized change management journeys. The progression from awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. Many governance professionals make the mistake of jumping directly to ability. They immediately start implementing controls. That rarely works. People must move through every stage. Let's examine each one. Stage 1. Awareness. This is where change begins. People must first understand why governance matters, why change is necessary, what risks currently exist, what problems governance solves. Without awareness, resistance begins immediately, because people naturally resist changes they don't understand. This is why successful governance programs invest heavily in communication. Not because communication is nice, because communication is necessary. At JP Morgan and Barclays, major governance initiatives often began with months of awareness building before significant implementation occurred. Executives explained the business drivers, regulatory expectations, quality issues, risk exposure, strategic objectives. Awareness creates understanding. Understanding creates support. Stage 2. Desire. Awareness alone is insufficient. People must also want to participate. This is where many governance initiatives struggle. Employees understand governance, but they don't see personal value. They ask, why should I update metadata? Why should I attend stewardship meetings? Why should I follow governance standards? Why should I change my existing process? Successful governance programs answer these questions. They demonstrate benefits. They explain value. They create incentives. They align governance with business outcomes. Only then does desire emerge. Stage 3. Knowledge. Once people want to participate, they must learn how. Knowledge includes governance concepts, roles and responsibilities, policies, standards, workflows, tools, issue management processes, stewardship practices. This is where training becomes essential. One of the biggest mistakes organizations make is assuming people understand governance automatically. They don't. Governance is a learned capability. Training creates competence. Competence creates confidence. Hashtag Stage 4 Ability Now implementation begins. This is where individuals actually perform governance activities. Creating metadata, managing definitions, resolving issues, applying standards, monitoring quality, participating in governance councils. Notice something important. Ability appears fourth, not first. Many organizations attempt implementation before awareness, desire, and knowledge exist. That almost always creates resistance. Successful governance programs follow the full progression. Hashtag Stage 5, Reinforcement. This is where long-term success occurs, because behavior must be sustained. Think about exercise. Many people start exercising, few sustain it. Governance works exactly the same way. Organizations launch governance, but sustaining governance is harder than launching it. Reinforcement ensures governance becomes habitual. Examples include performance objectives, governance metrics, recognition programs, executive reporting, stewardship scorecards, success stories, continuous communication. Without reinforcement, organizations gradually return to old behaviors. Hashtag the OCM program framework. Now let's examine the governance-specific OCM program shown at the bottom of the slide. DAMA identifies 4 major components: planning, training, communications, influencing. Let's explore each one. Hashtag planning. Everything begins with planning. The slide highlights stakeholder analysis, executive sponsorship. Governance leaders must identify who will support the initiative, who may resist, who influences decisions, who controls funding, who drives adoption. Stakeholder analysis helps prioritize engagement activities. Executive sponsorship is equally critical. Without visible leadership support, governance struggles to gain momentum. Hashtag training. The second component is education. The slide emphasizes increasing awareness of data management best practices. Number 1. Training must occur across all levels: executives, stewards, owners, technology teams, business users, governance councils. Each audience requires different content. Executives need strategic understanding. Stewards need operational skills. Technology teams need implementation guidance. Training accelerates adoption. Number 1. Communications. The third component is communication. This is often underestimated. Many governance leaders communicate once, then stop. Successful programs communicate continuously. What is changing? Why is it changing? What benefits exist? What progress has been made? What success stories have emerged? What lessons have been learned? Communication reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is often the root cause of resistance. The final component focuses on embedding governance into business operations. The slide specifically references integrating governance into SDLC. This is critical, because governance should not operate as a separate activity. It must become part of existing business processes. For example, project approvals, application development, risk reviews, procurement processes, vendor onboarding, regulatory reporting, change management. Governance becomes sustainable when it is integrated into normal work. Why most governance programs fail over the years? I've observed recurring failure patterns. No executive sponsorship, no communication strategy, no stakeholder engagement, no stewardship training, no adoption metrics, no reinforcement mechanisms. Organizations focus heavily on technology and ignore culture. The result? Policies exist, tools exist, committees exist, adoption does not. Governance becomes documentation rather than behavior. Hashtag the DAMA exam perspective. Now let's focus on the exam tip shown on this slide. DAMA explicitly states, to benefit from data as a corporate asset, the culture must learn to value data. This is an incredibly powerful statement, because governance ultimately depends on culture. The CDMP exam frequently tests this concept through scenarios involving resistance, adoption challenges, governance sustainability, stewardship participation, executive sponsorship, training requirements. Whenever you see questions about organizational adoption, think OCM. Whenever you see resistance to governance, think OCM. Whenever you see sustainability challenges, think OCM. Executive perspective. The most mature organizations understand a simple truth. Technology changes systems. Governance changes behavior. And behavior change requires organizational change management.